Hi, this is Doug Schumann, and I'm here with my equipment to show you how I make apple cider mead. This is a fall favorite. I tend to make it mostly every fall because the availability of apple cider is very good, and you can get some very good local, good quality apple cider. This one happens to come from the market in town, and it's not pasteurized, so I like to get stuff that is not processed. And let me just go over the ingredients. 1 gallon, that's about what we're going to make, 1 gallon of mead. So that's a gallon of apple cider. 1 full pint of honey. This happens to be my honey. It's a little on the dark side this year. I'm choosing it on the dark side. It's going to be a little more flavor than the lighter honeys. You'll need some nutrients. This is Fermax yeast nutrient. You will need some yeast energizer. I have that in a package right here. All fruit fermentations usually require some pectin enzyme to break down the pectin in the fruit. I have some acid blend along with a pH tester. Of course, some measuring spoons and some Camden tablets. This will be to make sure it's clean. We're going to really kill off all the bacteria and everything with Camden tablets. It's potassium metabisulfate. And when you read on wine bottles that it contains sulfites, that's because they'll do this. They'll use these chemical to kill off all of the bacteria and yeast and stuff in the must before you pitch your yeast. I'm choosing Cote de Blanc by Red Star Yeast. This is a white wine yeast with a kind of a low alcohol tolerance. It goes up to maybe 13 or 14% alcohol. My fall size are usually, I'll only set it up for about 11 or 12% alcohol, just like a light white wine. And it's not hard to make. We need a fermenter bucket with usually an airlock on the top of it. We do need a testing cylinder along with a hydrometer. Hydrometer to measure the amount of sugars before and to make sure that the fermentation has the proper amount of sugars to achieve the right alcohol level. And of course, when we're done fermenting in the bucket, we will move it over the racket into a 1 gallon jug with a a rubber bung that will also take an airlock on the top. So this is basically how we're going to start. And basically we're going to put these ingredients together in the fermenter bucket. We're going to add the Camden tablets, mix it all up, and then we need to let it sit for 24 hours after we add the Camden tablet. So that sitting allows the Camden tablet to do its job, clear all the bacteria and yeast, and then it'll sort of weaken and dissipate so that when it comes time after 24 hours, we'll pitch the yeast and set this up for fermentation. Fermentation should take about a week, and then we'll be able to rack it off. Okay, so let's proceed with mixing these ingredients. And one quick word about sanitation. You do want to clean your bucket very well. Soap and water, dry it out well. Make sure your other items are all clean too, soap and water and dried. At this stage, we are going to mix this stuff together in the fermenter bucket. So I will give you basically the measurements as I go along here. I like to put the apple cider in first before I put the honey in. I can smell some really good apple cider there. All right. Then I'm going to put in a pint that's 16 fluid ounces. And it helps to have a good stir and dump that in there. Now for the amount of sugars, a thing that I'll mention is that, you know, every apple cider is not made the same, but different apples. So the apple cider itself can have a different level of sugar based on where it is and where it comes from. So this amount of honey and the apple cider are supposed to give you enough sugars to produce about 11 or 12% alcohol in the apple cider mead. We're going to measure the amount of sugars using the hydrometer, and we can't do that really until we get this mixed up. Okay, so that's a pint. The rest of the basics are, we're going to use 1/2 a teaspoon of this nutrient. So we want to make sure we level that off. And that's to help the yeast to grow. It'll have nutrients to work on. We're going to do 1/2 a teaspoon of pectin enzyme. Level that off. We're going to do 1/2 teaspoon of yeast energizer. Level that off and put it in. All right. Let's stir that up some more. It is very helpful to have a 2 or 3 gallon bucket when you're doing this, so that you know you're not up on the edge of the bucket when you're stirring and mixing. All right, this looks pretty good. All right. Now, in order to test this, I'm just going to use a baster syringe. And we're going to add this to our testing tube. One of my things is I always spin this hydrometer to make sure that it doesn't have any bubbles on it and it's affecting the reading. So I'm looking at it and I'm taking a reading of it's just under 1.090, so it may be 1.088. 090 is perfect for me. So the amount of sugar in the apples with that 1 pint of honey is perfect, and that will if it ferments properly, all the way down to the finished fermentation, it'll have about 11 or 12% alcohol. Okay. Now the other nice thing to check if you're keeping an eye on things in your mead making is to have a simple pH test. And this is just a strip. You put that in, and then you check the color against the colored things on the front of this. And this is typical that the pH will be a little higher than I usually want it. This is probably a pH of about 4. It's a lot of your wines and meads, their pHs are lower, 3.5 or below that. So in my experience, I have used this acid blend in the past, and I have had to add at least a teaspoon before. So I'm going to go ahead and add approximately a teaspoon. That's a 1/2. And we'll get the other half here. Okay. And stir that up again. So that should get the acidity of the mead down a little bit. You want it to be more stringent, a little sharp. And that's been my experience with apple cider. It tends to be a little bit on the base side. It'll be 4 or more on the pH scale. And we like to get that down to maybe 3.5. All right, and we can probably get a response to the addition of that acid blend pretty good. All right, so it is greener. The reading on this tip is greener. It's about 3.6 maybe. So we lowered it. I could lower it a little more, but I think what I'll do is let the fermentation proceed. You can always add acid blend even after it's fermented. So that's the basics of mixing the ingredients. That's easy. And testing for the amount of sugars and testing for the pH level. And then the only thing we need to do final is to put in the potassium metabisulfite. It's the Camden tablets. So if you get your Camden, you can actually get it in a powder, but these are actually tablets. And the best way to convert them into a powder is to put them in a little spoon, take another spoon, and just crush them. So you can push down hard enough. And you'll crush them up into a powder. Sprinkle that in there. And this is a complete must. It's all finished, and basically it's got to sit, as I mentioned earlier, 24 hours now with the Camden tablets in there. And these Camden tablets will, as we said, eliminate all bacteria and yeast that would have been active or live. So that's the basic ingredients. We'll come back in 24 hours and pitch some yeast. Okay, it's 24 hours later, and it's time to pitch yeast into our apple cider mead. So let me give you the way that I take care of pitching yeast or adding the yeast. I use distilled water, just bought from any grocery store. I will add a small amount to a clean jar. The jar and these things that I have here I'm using were not only washed with soap and water, but they were sterilized to make sure that they were clean. And I used just a sterile solution and submerge them for a minute or two and make sure they're clean. All right, so the sterile water in the jar goes in the microwave for maybe 10 seconds, not much. You're going to want to get that water up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 38 degrees Celsius. All right, and then once you have it in there and you're measuring the temperature, if it's a little too warm, just add some more of your cool water, bring it down a little bit. And once you get it to the proper temperature, and by the way, I'm following the directions on the back of this Red Star Cote de Blanc yeast for hydrating the yeast. So we're using approximately 98 to 100 degree water. We're putting the yeast into about 50 milliliters, and that's what my measuring cup here is, 50 milliliters of water. And we're stirring that up really good, and we're letting it go for 15 minutes. It says 20 on the package. I'm sure you can get it, hydrated and pretty smooth and creamy in about 15 minutes. So, and this is, it's way too much yeast for 1 gallon. This package makes 5 gallons. I could have used half a package and saved it. The yeast is like less than $2, so I don't really worry about it. I just use the whole package. And then get it hydrated in here at the proper amount of time. And then the other important factor of pitching yeast is using my home mixer. It's just a hand mixer. I put a paper towel on there to keep it from getting all gooey with sticky, sugary substance. And just a wire whisk, put that in, turn it on, and stir your must very vigorously. What you're doing is you're adding air to the must. Oxygen is required at the beginning of the fermentation process. It's required for this yeast to grow, to divide, and to grow and to multiply. That's the good thing. So as much oxygen as you want to put into that must, you could probably whip it up for 5-10 minutes. I've already done the whipping, so I'm going to bypass that stage for you. It's just simple, get it in there and whip it up. And then we'll put the yeast hydrated in there, and we'll stir that up good again with this. And that's pretty much the quick and easy of pitching this yeast. Now, just a little detail that I do to help myself later. I like to attach the yeast package to the container here, the bucket, and I like to take a piece of masking tape, and I just write on there the beginning date, what I'm making, the starting gravity, the pH, and the temperature. Okay, so that's kind of going to stay with this this apple cider mead. When I do my first rack, I'll be able to take this tape off and attach it to the jug, and just to keep a record of each stage and where I'm at with specific gravity checking pH and temperature. The temperature should be 68 degrees. That would be pretty normal. All right, so the last final thing, add your lid with your airlock on it. Make sure they're secure, and always add some water to the prescribed level to the airlock, and then you can let this bucket sit in a cool, dry place. Again, 65 to say 70 degrees. In a day or two, it'll start bubbling, showing that the carbon dioxide is being released as the yeast break down the sugars. It should bubble maybe for a week. And the prescribed method that people say, when the fermentation starts to get complete, the bubbling will die down to maybe 1 or 2 a second, and that's pretty close to being done. If you want to wait longer than a week or 2 weeks, it's fine. It'll just die out on its own. The yeast will flocculate down to the bottom of the bucket. And then the next step would be to rack that off into a jug so we can start aging it.